What
Yes.
surprised you the most?
Like post, like after I got sober,
Mhm.
what surprised me the most? I think probably the most surprising thing, which seems so simple, is that my honest real life was much more interesting than the life that I would kind of fabricate to get people to so I could blend in, and I definitely lied a lot. I lied for sure, like in the height of my addiction, and I lied about little things when I was growing up, but mainly I just left stuff out. I lied by omission. And so yeah, I don't do that anymore. I don't do that at all anymore. And I find that people are fascinated with these areas of my life that I used to hide in a good way.
Hi, it's Terry, and today I have a bonus episode here on the Sober Edge podcast. So, welcome. This bonus episode is to introduce you to a magnificent author, Laura Cathcart Robbins. Laura is the author of Stash, My Life in Hiding. And the reason that she is on the podcast today is because I wanted to introduce her to you and invite you to join us for a very special event that is happening April 26th. And this event is sponsored by the Sober Edge Book Club. So you are invited to join us for an event where Laura will be our author spotlight guest in the Sober Edge Book Club. And we will get a chance to ask her questions, talk about the book. I think we will get Laura maybe to do a little reading. And I wanted to bring her on the podcast and introduce you because I think you will see how powerful her storytelling is. And Laura has a rich background of writing and serving. She's also a podcast host. And so I want to read her bio, and then I want to make sure that you register for our author spotlight next week, where our guest will be Laura. And you can do that either on the show notes that I'm going to include the link, or you can go to the Sober Edge Book Club Instagram. You can go to Instagram, Laura Cathcart Robbins. You can go to Terry.the Sober Nutritionist Instagram. The links will be all there. And if you are one of the first 20 people to register, you will be entered in a drawing for an autographed copy of Laura's book, Stash. So I want to share Laura's bio with you and prepare to be impressed. She has won lots of awards for Stash, and she is an incredible writer. So I will see you over in the episode, and don't forget to join us next week for our special event. Laura Cathcart Robbins is the best-selling author of a memoir, Stash, My Life in Hiding, and the host of the popular podcast, The Only One in the Room. She has been active for many years as a speaker and school trustee and is credited for creating the Buckley School's nationally recognized Committee on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Her recent articles on the subject of race, recovery, and divorce have garnered her worldwide acclaim. She is the SDWF's 2024 Memoirist of the Year, a TEDx speaker, and an LA Moth Story Slam winner. Currently, she sits on the advisory boards of the San Diego's Writers Festival and the Outliers HQ Podcast Festival. You can find out more about her on her website, lauracathcartrobbins.com, or you can look for her on Facebook, Instagram, or TikTok and follow her on X. All right, let's meet Laura and then come see her live next week. Welcome to the Sober Edge podcast, inspiration for alcohol-free living. I'm your host, Terry Patterson, functional nutritionist and This Naked Mind senior coach. The Sober Edge is a place to explore the infinite possibilities on the other side of drinking. In a culture soaked in booze, discover the wonder and joy of taking a different path. Meet real people living lives of purpose and passion. Learn the truth behind the alcohol myths and get ready to be motivated, inspired, and astounded by what is possible with the Sober Edge. Well, hey everyone, it's Terry back with a very special edition of the Sober Edge Book Club. I am doing a little one-off to highlight a special author and a special guest today. So I have with me, I want to say in the studio, Laura, but that's not exactly right. She's got this lovely microphone, so it feels like we're in a studio. But I have invited Laura Cathcart Robbins to the podcast today, and we are going to talk about your book, Stash, My Life in Hiding. So, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
So, I was introduced to Laura because she's going to come in for a special event in our author spotlight with the book club. And so I started listening to your Audible version of Stash. And we were chatting a bit before we hit record how much I enjoyed hearing it in your own words. And you were telling me that it's technically very difficult to record. But I'm curious, Laura. Was it difficult emotionally to go back and hear the story, read the story aloud and put it in your own tone and hear those hard parts?
Because it is so technical, the recording part of it, and I was explaining I'm in Los Angeles and there was a director in New York who was there, virtually with me. There was a producer on site with me. There was an engineer. There were PAs. So it was more about getting it technically perfect than really feeling the emotion of it. I had never read the book out loud from front to back. That had never happened before. I'd read bits of it out loud. But there were a couple places where I got choked up and and the director was like, "Yes, that's great. Keep that going." But then she had interrupted me, so I would have to like resummon that kind of choked up feeling. But yeah, there were a couple parts. They weren't hard, but they were emotional to read. Yeah.
Well, one of the things that I really appreciated about your book is I feel like you and I had the opportunity to meet once before, but I feel like I know you. And do you get that a lot? Do people come up and be like, "So, Laura, let's dish about this and that"?
It's probably the oddest thing for me about having, because ironically, I guess, I'm a very private person. And my really good friends who I write about in this book, who are still my really good friends, they had no idea that any of this was going on in my life because I keep everything very close to the vest. I'm not somebody who goes and asks people for advice or confides in them or talks about, my love life or anything like that. I keep it, well, previous to getting sober, I kept it very close. I'm a little bit different now, but because I understand the difference between privacy and secrecy. And I was very secretive in the past. But so having written this, years after the year that I write about, which is 2008, I wrote it 10 years later or 12. And that was not as difficult, but having people read it and then come up to me knowing these very intimate, vulnerable details of my life, that was a little shock to my system. And there are some details in the book. There's a love story in the book, and people comment on the love story and feel very invested in it. And it's also my real life. So it's just very strange. I've never had anything like that happen.
Yes, and I would imagine that that's probably true for most authors who write something, a painful part of their story. And what I love about your story is ultimately it's, of course, triumphant. And, there's so much wrapped up in this place of drinking or using substances. And I was fascinated by yours because I had never read about someone's story with a prescribed drug. Like you fell into this. And I know part of your story is that there's an undercurrent of why. But it's kind of scary to really understand how this was not, you weren't out like scoring drugs on the street. I mean,
Yeah.
Ambien, for heaven's sakes.
I was not out scoring drugs on the street, but I'm really careful not to paint myself as kind of like a victim of the medical and pharmaceutical industry because I don't believe that I was. I think that Ambien's a really good drug. And if it's prescribed for somebody for the reasons that it was prescribed to me and taken as prescribed, it can be really effective. It's not really meant to be taken for more than 10 days at a time, which I didn't know. And I don't think as much was known about it in 2008 or in 2002 when it was first prescribed to me. 2008 is when I stopped using it. But in any case, I feel like that was one of the reasons I wanted to write this book, because I didn't see stories where, there was this intersection of race, privilege, and addiction. And that privilege did encompass the fact for me that I was prescribed these drugs by doctors that felt like it was because of the circumstances in which I found myself that I could navigate like that. If I didn't enjoy the status that I did at that time, I might have had to source other ways to find drugs if I'd gotten addicted to something. Um, I'm sure that I would have been addicted to something eventually. And so it was, just this thing woke it up in me. I took that first one, and I write this in the book. The first two words that came to mind when I woke up were again, please.
Mm.
Like, I want to experience that again.
Yeah. Well, and I appreciate you saying that about, like it's not really about the drug. The drug is kind of the symptom of what we're bearing, what we're using it for,
Yeah.
be it alcohol or drugs. But I also think that I'm trained also as a functional nutritionist. And sometimes I see that we're just not following up enough. Doctors don't have enough time. And that's part of where I think the system is broken down is they're not really asking like, or noticing like she's been taking this for longer than 10 days. Let's ask if it's working. Let's ask if it's working in the ways it's supposed to. And
Yeah.
hopefully some of that is changing. There's more education perhaps around that.
I think a lot of it has changed now. I think that I mean, I haven't tried to like rig the system in a long time. I made myself cough with that laugh. But yeah, I haven't tried to work the system in a long time. But what I understand from hearing other people's journeys is that they're cut short faster than mine was, because they're not able to get away with it as long. So then they do go to other sources. If they're interested in continuing to pursue it, they start going online because it's very easy, or they have a dealer or whatever it might be. But then in 2002 through 2008, it was pretty easy for me to get it from doctors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm curious, tell us why you waited so long to write the book. Like, did you think you would write a book about this period of your life eventually, and you knew that was in the back of your mind, or did it sort of suddenly happen?
I think, I've always written. I don't think I ever knew for sure that I was going to be a professional writer, but I've always enjoyed writing. I've written ever since I can remember, honestly. But when I first got sober, I wasn't able to write for pleasure anymore for a while, for about 5 years. And it was really starting to bum me out. Like, I thought that I had lost this piece of myself that was so essential to who I was. And so I started taking writing classes like it was my job. I took writing class after writing class, 3 or 4 at a time, to try to kind of get my mojo back, to try to get, like, to that place where you go from inertia to momentum.
Mm.
I figured I treat my writing mind like a starving body, and you have to like feed it small bits to hopefully it gets hungry again, right? The body gets hungry on its own. And I was hoping that my spirit would crave writing again. And eventually it did. But it took a while. And I decided to, submit a book proposal after taking a book proposal class. These are all classes that I took. So decided to submit a book proposal to 16 different agents, and they all rejected me. But the ones that didn't send me a form letter back highlighted this year of 2008 as like, maybe that's the meat of your story. And I was like, man, that's exactly the story I don't want to write. That was the hardest, most painful year of my life. I don't want to write about that. I want to write about this other stuff, this like more salacious stuff, this kind of juicy, but salacious in a different way, like not not the nitty-gritty, not the vulnerable, intimate stuff. And as time went on, and I just decided to like, let me look for books that are like this one to see what other people are writing. And there just weren't any written by people of color. Like none, zero. When I finally submitted the book proposal for Stash, I couldn't find a comparison because, they ask you to say, compare it to two current titles that are doing well. And so I was like, man, I'm going to have to write this book. Like, I'm going to really need to get this book out there because there's not even anything for me to compare it to try to get it published. So I started pushing for it then. And then I got an agent who pushed for me, and she's amazing. She's wonderful. And she pushed it through.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the book came out last March, correct? March 2023. So your
Yes.
book baby turned a year. Congratulations. So
Thank you.
have you seen or been approached by other women of color that are inspired by this? Or have you seen maybe now that because I know the proposal comes out and it takes a while for the book to come out, right?
Yeah.
So is the landscape changing?
I know that there are two books coming out this year written by women of color, neither of them Black, but they're books I'm really looking forward to. Don't ask me the titles because I can't remember them. But there are those two coming out, and so that's great. I have a lot of direct messages from women of color, specifically Black women, who really are just grateful that the book was written. Most of them don't connect with my drug of choice. Almost no one connects with my drug of choice, which was Ambien.
Yeah.
There are a few people who do, but it's kind of an odd thing to get addicted to. But the feelings and the shame and the hiding are the things that they could connect with. And especially if they're moms, then
Mhm.
there's an even deeper connection to that shame of being a mom who can't stop drinking or using for their kids' sake, which was my story. So that's been really helpful to people. And I'm so glad. I'm so glad that it's something, out there in this sea of other really amazing books on addiction and recovery and, sobriety and being sober curious. Like there are so many great books, but there just aren't that many or almost any written by people of color. Forget women of color, just people of color.
Mm. Well, and I think that one of the most important things that I've noticed in my own journey and in the coaching work that I do is that it's so powerful to see your story in someone else. It
Yes.
it sort of cracks open that shame barrier and we say, "Oh gosh, it's not just me.
Hmm.
I thought I was the only crazy person out there who thought this, or I thought I was the only one that was secretly hiding vodka in my closet." And when
Yes.
we hear not only is there someone else, but there's someone like me, I think, Laura, that's what you bring to this space so beautifully.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. It's also the not addiction, but the basis for our podcast, The Only One in the Room, is just that. When people come on thinking they're the only one dealing with whatever, as soon as they share the story, then people chime in and say, me too, me too, me too, and they feel seen. So both, the people that are chiming in and the person telling the story, which
I
is a
love
really
that.
beautiful
I love
thing.
that concept. It's such a powerful concept to
Yeah.
help
Yeah.
us feel more connected and I'm sure you've heard it said that the opposite of addiction is connection. And
Yeah.
so being able to help people feel connected through their story
Mhm.
is powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. I absolutely agree. And it's been really fun. I started the podcast because I wanted to build an author's platform so I could sell this book. So the podcast is actually 5 years old this year, which is really nice. But it's opened up a different way for me to connect with people, like you said.
Hmm. Yeah. And so I love this, the middle of the story. Like we see you at what we know is the beginning, like you're leaving drugs and alcohol behind and we all step out into this place with our heart like pounding and we're not exactly sure what's going to happen. And
Mm.
so I love that you are sharing that so much has opened up on the other side of this. What
Yeah.
was surprised you the most?
Like post, like after I got sober,
Mhm.
what would surprise me the most? I think probably the most surprising thing, which seems so simple, is that my honest real life was much more interesting than the life that I would kind of fabricate to get people to so I could blend in, and I definitely lied a lot. I lied for sure, like in the height of my addiction, and I lied about little things when I was growing up, but mainly I just left stuff out. I lied by omission. So, I didn't graduate from high school. I barely finished the ninth grade. I didn't go to college. I would leave those things out, when I was asked to join the board at the Buckley School, for example. That was not something that I brought to the table. I thought I was more desirable, more attractive in this edited form. And what I found out by getting sober and telling the truth, and that doesn't mean that I tell people everything. I don't, it's not like word vomit, but if I'm asked a question, I answer truthfully. And even sometimes that answer is, that's not something I'm ready to talk about yet, but I appreciate the question. And so that lets them know that there's an answer there, but I'm just not ready to give it to them. And before I would have just died before I'd answered anything like that, because I have this desire, and it comes off kind of like people pleasing, but that's not what it is in my head. It's like, I don't want you to question me. I don't want you to be interested in me for the wrong reasons. So I'm going to give you an answer that'll kind of get the heat off of me, basically. I don't really care if they're comfortable. I just don't want any more attention on me regarding something. And so yeah, I don't do that anymore. I don't do that at all anymore. And I find that people are fascinated with these areas of my life that I used to hide in a good way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that's simple at all. I think it's deep. I think it's profound to recognize that we are enough in our unedited form.
Yeah. Yeah. Scary.
Yeah.
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 Very, I mean, again, not anymore. I don't think about it anymore in that way. Most of the time, certainly sometimes I do, depending on the circumstance. But in my day to day, it doesn't come up very often. But at first, I was terrified,
Mhm.
absolutely terrified. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Brene Brown talks about it as armor,
Yes. Yes.
and so what happens when we take our armor off? Oh my
Mhm.
goodness.
Yeah, we're
You know?
vulnerable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And people can see us.
Yes.
And it's such a powerful thing, as you said, that when we are able to be seen and comfortable enough, not all the way comfortable in our own skin,
Mhm.
wow, what a difference that makes how we
Yeah.
show up and how
Yes.
we move through the day.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it's something that is, I don't think it's something that I could have been taught. Certainly, it was modeled for me later on, and it was suggested to me, but I had to learn it on my own. I had to walk through the scariness of it, say it out loud, realize that a lightning bolt didn't strike, and then say the next thing and realize that the ground didn't open. Like each step was really scary, but then I didn't die and I didn't go into shock and I didn't. And then so that I could keep going.
Mm. What do you think has been the guiding principles of your recovery journey? Like, what have you held on to? I know you talk about your time in treatment. You certainly went to 12-step programs. That wasn't my experience. Do you have sort of grounding principles that you use that you consider part of your recovery practice?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'm a person who operates well with integrity. Um, and I think I lost that for a really long time. I threw that under the bus so that I could operate out in the world in a way that I thought people wanted me to be. Um, and, my friends who know me now call me Miss Boundaries because, and they're like, they ask me, like, how do you have such good boundaries? And I don't know that they're good boundaries. I mean, I guess they are, but it's really just me being honest. And to caveat that, it's when I was in treatment, and I write about this in the book, like I had my arms crossed, my mouth closed, sunglasses on whenever I could. I hated it in there. I was not conforming. I was not going to have the experience that the person sitting next to me was. I was really just enduring that time. And so I know what it's like to comply. Like I complied, but I was not an acceptance of anything. And so later on, and I call it like a thaw, like I was an iceberg when I got out of treatment and I thawed over the next couple years. I really began to be able to trust, to first of all, to know what my intuition was and then to rely on it. So I wasn't just doing what I wanted to do. I was doing what I was aligned with. And that took me a little while to figure out. And certainly there were things that I was aligned with that I didn't want to do, but I did them anyway because that was the next right indicated action. And that in that with that action, I'd be operating in my integrity, which brings me closer to the woman that I want to be. Anytime I don't, it brings me further away from that woman. And that is more precious to me than wanting or feeling good about doing something. I don't know if that makes sense. I used to base everything on whether or not it felt good. And now it doesn't need to feel good in the moment in order for it to be good, because some things are really good for me that don't feel good when I take the action. Like working out is a really simple example. I never want to work out. I do it every day because it's better for me. I'm better when I work out, right? I don't ever want to meditate. I do that every day. I do go to 12-step meetings quite regularly. I never want to go. I go all the time. And so as a result of those things, I am better, even if I don't feel good engaging in those things.
Mm. I love that. And I wrote down a couple of points because you said that was such a rich soundbite there. But that delayed gratification, right, is understanding. And I think that, I always describe or often describe alcohol as the easy button.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so when we have to choose to delay that instantaneous feeling that we get from our drug of choice, we have to choose it for that higher good. And
Yeah.
and I think about the loving our future self.
Hmm.
And so when we do those things in the present, it's really a gift to that future self.
Well, it's
And
optimism, isn't it?
yeah.
Yeah. We're optimistic that we're not only going to be here, but we're going to, if we take care of ourselves and we're going to be healthy in the future. And, so all these investments in the future self is optimism.
Yeah. Yeah, I love
And
that. And you talk, so two things I want to make sure that I ask you about. You mentioned intuition, and I am fascinated by this, Laura, because I have my own experience, and I see it a lot with my clients. So I'll call it a loose theory. But what I see a lot is that and I am more familiar with alcohol, but when we are in addiction, we kind of dial down our intuition because our no doesn't mean no and our yes doesn't mean yes. And so I feel like in listening to your book, there were these sparks of intuition that I think, wow, that was amazing that she realized. Like your divorce is a perfect example. Like you went against all the advice and did what felt right in your heart. And I think it's so amazing because it takes a while for most of us to get to a place where we trust that inner voice.
yeah. Yeah. I I kind of think of it like there is this sparkly shining thing around me that I have access to at times. And when I was in the bottoming out in the addiction, I had very, very little access to it. And that is the thing that, gives me the glow when something's right, or, says, no, 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 not that way when something is really wrong. But it was all blotted out when I was drinking and using, because that's the only focus. It's survival for me. It was survival for me. It's like, I got to get well. That's what I thought in my head. I just didn't want to be sick at the end. I was trying to get high, but more importantly, I was trying not to be sick. And so it really did feel like life or death.
Mhm.
And that blotted out everything that should have told me or guided me. And then, there are those moments throughout the book where I made sure to insert, like, this is a moment where I was able to, and it's all about, I think, for me, choices. And when I'm drinking and using, I don't have choices anymore. And I know that's not true for everybody, but for me, it was true. The option is to continue. That's it. That's the only option I have. And so when I had these moments where I had choices, like, that's my recovery, is choices.
Mhm.
And I had a choice to, go left or right. And, somebody that I know says there is no wrong or right. There's only left or right. And either way, you're going to have an experience you need to have, which I love.
Yeah.
So it really wasn't even the wrong way when I went left, because I needed that experience. But I want more of those right-hand turn experiences. I don't want to have to learn any more lessons. Like, I feel like I've learned enough, and my intuition really helps with that now.
Mhm.
It really guides me towards experiences that I won't have to go and make an amends for, or feel bad about afterward, or, ruminate over whether or not it was the right thing. I can do the thing that is the right thing for me, like I said, not right, but aligned with me.
Mhm.
And then I don't have to ruminate or worry or feel bad or resent anybody.
Yeah, and I love that you have these places that are now in writing and in your own voice that you can look back on and say, "Oh, yes, I can trust myself,"
Yes.
because these amazing things happen in your story. I thought they were amazing. That we watch, that is the real Laura. She sees it. She sees it.
Yeah.
I think it's so beautiful because it reminds us all that amidst our darkest times, there is still a part of us we can tap into.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and some people go too far and they're not able to touch that anymore, which,
Yeah.
I have no idea how that wasn't me.
Mhm.
I really don't. I don't understand how I wasn't one of the people that went too far, but I'm so grateful that I was able to arrest. I mean, and it wasn't just me. It was more than me. It was everything that allowed me to arrest this in the middle, or at the end. I don't know where I was, and become who I really am, find who I really am.
Yeah, I love this idea of I think this journey for those of us that are on the other side of addiction is really about becoming and unbecoming.
Yes.
And yeah, it's so your story highlights that so well because we see. I love that you wove in the stories of pain from your childhood and the things that were beautiful as well. Your
Mm,
relationship with your parents,
yeah.
and so I see this as a love story, not just with your romantic love story that's part of the book, but really see this as such a love story with your sons.
Yes, yes, it is. It's also a love story with Ambien too. Like, I fell in love with it, and then I had to break up with it. And those were both really big moments in my life, or not moments, times in my life. But yeah, I mean, yeah, the whole book is about me trying to be the mother that my two sons deserved, the kind of mother that I wanted to be to them. Um, and not just out of obligation or duty, but because I was in love with them, and I didn't want to see them hurt. I didn't want to see them separated from me. I wanted to do everything I could to take care of them, to take, like, real care of them. And um, it was getting to the place where I wasn't going to be able to do that. And I was going to lose that choice of whether or not I could be in my children's lives. No one was threatening me with it. No one said, I'm going to take this away from you. But I knew. that that's what was down the line. And honestly, rightfully so. If I was not able to take care of myself, I shouldn't have had two kids to take care of. Um, in addition to not being able to take care of myself. So my boys are my heart, and that was the most painful year of my life. Going through everything I went through that year, it's that pain is impressed upon me. Like I remember it viscerally. I feel it in my body still. Uh, which is why I could write about it the way that I did, because it's still the memory of it lives there, but the pain doesn't anymore.
Mm.
I don't hurt when I think about it, but I remember what it felt like.
Oh, that's a really good point. And you said something on another podcast that I thought was so beautiful. And it was actually, I think you said, I went to treatment for my boys, but I chose sobriety for me.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's true. That didn't come right after treatment that I chose sobriety for me. It took about a year, after going to treatment, and I stayed sober, uh, meaning I didn't, drink or use anything, during that time, but I wasn't into it. I wasn't into sobriety as a way of life for me. I was just like, let me get this straight. Like, you don't need to worry about me. I'm good. You all can look the other way now, get the heat off of me so that I can just be a mom to my boys. I felt like once that was settled, then I could go back to using and drinking again. That's what I really felt. And I thought, I'll do this for a year. And then, I'll be able to take an Ambien every once in a while because, of course, it's not that powerful of a drug. That was just like a fluke. I was in a really bad place then. I needed something extra that I don't need now. And I had all these rationalizations going on in my head while I waited out that year. And in the program that I'm in, the sober fellowship that I'm in, it's in California anyway. You give a cake when someone turns a year sober. You give them a cake. You don't actually give them the cake, but you kind of present them with a cake and sing happy birthday, then you take the cake away. and and it's anyway, but it's called giving a cake. And so I took a cake. That's what it's called when I was a year sober. And still in the back of my mind, I'm getting out of here after this. I was not trying to stay. And someone asked me to sponsor them in this program right after I sat back down. And I was like, oh, I don't know anything about this program. You don't want me. Like, I've just been basically biding my time here. Like, I haven't read anything. I don't know anything. You definitely don't want me. And she was really insistent that she did. And so I started meeting with her and reading the literature with her. And something transpired. I started understanding the nature of my addiction and my alcoholism, which is what I call it. And in understanding it better, I also understood that there was a solution that really didn't exist within me for it, because everything that had existed within me hadn't worked. So I needed something outside of myself for this solution. And so I became more in acceptance of that. And it's very funny. Like, now I'm somebody who speaks a lot in this, or in our community, and I sponsor a lot of women, and people look at me like I've really just, like I'm the expert in this, which is just funny to me. But I really found myself in this program, and stopped resisting the idea that this is going to be something for me, I don't think I can play around. Like, I don't think I could go get another Ambien prescription and take it as needed.
Mhm.
I don't think that's possible for me. And the way that if I shift my thinking around that, I think I'm in trouble. And I thought once my boys were grown, I also could start using and drinking again because they didn't need me in the same way. But the truth is they both call me every day, and they live nearby. And we see each other every Sunday for Sunday dinners, and we are really close. And I can't even imagine the devastation if I took myself out the way I was taking myself out before, that they would feel. Even still, my sobriety is not for them. It is for me. Yes.
Well, I think about what you just said there, Laura, that, they still need you. But what I want to say that I've discovered is you still need you. Like,
Yes.
I am in love with this current version of me.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that that is one of the most beautiful parts in my life is that I actually really I trust myself. I like myself. I have integrity. I show up. I'm authentic. I follow through. Make mistakes. I forgive myself. I make mistakes and ask other people to forgive me. That just happened today. I
Yeah.
was like, I had to write an apology to someone, and I was like, the next time I say, maybe I shouldn't put you on the spot, I should just stop talking because
Right.
obviously I'm about to put someone on the spot.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think that it's so powerful to recognize. And I tell people all the time, I'm not a sponsor, but I am a coach. Um, the one person we're going to end up with on the other side of this that we know for sure is us. Some people do lose their children, their families. They do have devastating loss in their finding their way back to themselves. But the one person we know will be there is us.
Yeah.
And that's the person that I love to think about falling in love with again.
Absolutely. And I don't, I don't know if I desired this in my 20s, but certainly in my 40s, I desired a drama-free life, and I didn't have one. I was hustling for this thing, and everything was drama. And for the last 14 years, my life has been pretty drama-free, which is remarkable. And what's even more remarkable is that I love it. Like, I want to keep this life. This life that I've created is so beautiful. It's simple, but it's incredibly beautiful to me, and I find so much peace in it. Who knew that I peace was desirable?
Mm.
But for me it is, and it's where I am in my life. Age-wise, it's where I am in my life, relationship-wise. It's just so many different ways, and career-wise. And I just pieces like this shit. Like, can I curse?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
It just really is. And I didn't even know that that was desirable before.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing to actually give ourselves permission to seek what we want and deserve.
Mhm. Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So as you were talking about this woman asking you to sponsor her
Mm,
at the end of a 1 year cake after you take your cake,
yeah.
I am struck by my memory of your story where there were these little divine interventions along the way. Like, for example, you end up with a buddy who's driving to the airport with you after you leave treatment, and you had been fully intended to stop and pick up a prescription after your 30 days, and you
Yeah.
couldn't do it. While you were strategizing how to do it, you drove right by the pharmacy. And I thought, oh, that was on purpose.
Yes. Yes. I mean, and he, the buddy you're talking about, takes credit for that often as he possibly can. But I mean, there were a few things like that. Like, I had an attorney that really strongly recommended that I do drug testing after treatment, not because anybody had asked for it, but so that we would have that evidence, that documentation, should it ever be called into question. And if she hadn't done that, I hadn't made the choice to accept that suggestion, I was definitely going to pick up a refill. I was absolutely going to pick up one. I didn't pick it up in the car on the way back. So I'm like, okay, but I still have it. I still have the refill. I'll just get it transferred back to LA. And then there's, twice a week drug testing. And I'm like, I don't know how to beat that. So I'll just, now it's delayed another 3 months, right? My being able to pick up again because I got to go through this drug testing. And like you said, it was all because of my kids at that point. It was not for me. But if it interfered with me getting to stay in my children's lives, I was willing to go through the pain of that. And it was painful. It was really painful to be sober at that time.
Yeah.
Really painful. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that it's so amazing. And one of my favorite parts of the book was when you are saying goodbye to the gal, and I can't remember her name. Maybe you didn't share it in the book. I think you did, but I forgot it. But the one that does the drug testing.
Oh, Veronica.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
That's her real name too.
you're
Yeah.
like thinking about her and looking at her like, what is this? And you're in this dingy place and it's
Yes. Yeah.
humiliating. And you're like, sister, get out of here. And then at the
Mhm.
end, she takes your hands and you like have this such a cool moment of just
Yeah.
recognizing the humanity of what you've been through and one human to another. I thought that was so beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, that was a much longer scene, and my editor cut most of that out, but because
I probably would have liked it.
yeah, she like we ended up I showed up at that last visit with Christmas presents for all her kids, and she had a present for me, and like we talked about the Real Housewives of Atlanta every time I was there because it was during that time where it premiered, and we just got I knew everything about her family. We got super close. It really saved me, just like because the experience was terrible. I had no idea what that looked like because I had never witnessed anything like that. And so to show up and then like, oh, this is how you pee test. And then she has to watch. I'm like, oh, I'm a private person. This is terrible. And she was amazing. She really made that not just like I could endure it, but I actually ended up enjoying my time with her.
Mm.
Yeah.
I think what comes to mind is something you said earlier, Laura, is that we have to get around that resistance. And Byron Katie says it so well. She talks about loving what is. And
Mm.
I find it really hard to love what is. So I just start with accepting what is. And then maybe I get to loving what is. And I
Mm.
think we have to, in order to accept and then ultimately, hopefully, love what is, we have to, again, set aside that resistance and that, I'm going to do it my way, or I'm going to do it by myself, or I'm going to do it in secret, or I'm going to, I'm only going to do this part of it. And I think it's so powerful when we just allow, like, okay, what I've been doing isn't working and I'm open to something new.
Yeah. That's hard. I mean, for me, I kind of had to be beaten into that place, not literally, but I had to keep getting clobbered every time I tried to do something exactly what you said, secretively or on my own, or, I'm this really prideful, self-sufficient. I always have been. And I was and I still am sometimes, and I try not to be, but judgmental about people who need people. Like people who need people, I'm like, that's you could be better, basically. You could be better than somebody who needs somebody. And I understand more about that truth now, a lot more, but it's still my default is self-sufficiency.
Mhm.
So that thing you said about, resisting and sometimes I'm still resistant, but I find that I'm still willing,
Mhm.
even with the resistance, to do the work that gets me free.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for this conversation. I'm going to cue it up so that, people will come and we're going to do more of this book talk. And that's happening next Friday. So I'm very excited, Laura, that you're going to come back and share more of your story about Stash and really just this beautiful living version of recovery. And I think that, when we recover out loud, it can be a gift to so many other people. So thank you for your story and putting it out in the world. And if anybody isn't able to come and connect with you next week in the Sober Edge Book Club, where can people find you?
At Laura Cathcart Robbins is my Instagram. That's really the only social media place where I am. I have everything, but I don't ever look at the other stuff. And lauracathcartrobbins.com is my website, and that's where everything is. So Cathcart is Cathcart. Most people have a hard time with my last names. But yes, Laura Cathcart Robbins. And thank you so much for having me. This was great.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And we'll be seeing each other very soon. I want to thank you for tuning in to the Sober Edge podcast. This is a place for important conversations and a safe place to question everything you thought you knew about drinking. If you're looking for your sober edge, I want to invite you to connect with me at thesobernutritionist.com, where you can grab my free resource, Becoming More, a guide to loving your sober life. And I would be so grateful if you enjoyed this podcast, if you would leave a rating and review, as it will help more people find their sober edge.